The great river of the West, the Columbia. So big you'd think no one could miss it, but early explorers sailed right past it. It is the river of Woody Guthrie's songs. Remember, roll on, Columbia, roll on. Your power is turning the darkness to dawn. Roll on, Columbia, roll on. He got paid for writing that. He didn't get rich from it. But a lot of people have gained wealth from the river. Rivers and money and power just seem to go together. This mixture starts a long way from here, 1,264 miles. The Columbia separates two states, crosses one of them, and goes into Canada, a long way into Canada. Most of us never will travel these 1,200 miles. We don't have time, nor the inclination. But our helicopter pilot, Warren Petrie, does. He offered to trace the Columbia's run to the sea. He's on his way to the river's headwaters in British Columbia.
Absolutely incredible scenery.
It is through the mountains which have appeared on thousands of jigsaw puzzles.
You know, I had this in my mind, what I was going to see, and it turned out to be even more rugged and picturesque. Just the very winding canyon, and around every turn, it just got better.
To the top of the Rocky Mountains, where water flows either to the Atlantic or Pacific. As one century ends and another begins, we travel the Columbia River by air. British Columbia, a glacial valley with an aquamarine lake surrounded by mountains. On the left, the Selkirks. On the right, the Rockies. A river begins in a million places. The true headwaters are south of here. On our journey, pilot Warren Petrie says, let's see what is up there.
It's different than Alaska. It's different than the Colorado Rockies. It's different than the Cascades. And it is so unique in the scope and the size of the mountains, I think, is what makes it so incredible.
It is a climb to reach the top, up beyond the trees, up to the rocky crags which scratch the sky. Up through the gaps which lure us onward. The snows of these mountains nourish parts of two nations. Above it, the snowfields, the glaciers wait. In some distant decade, on some unknown day, the meltings from these high mountains will float past cities 1,000 miles away. The people of Wenatchee, Washington, or Rainier, Oregon, won't give a second glance, nor will they probably wonder from where the water came. This is one of the places. Here and in countless other places too begins the flow of water which will become the Columbia.
Look at that. This is all rock. That is all rock that's scoured all the dirt vegetation off of it. First, when I looked at it from up high, I thought it was just dirty ice. But it's just stripped it naked.
For the Columbia, glaciers are its birthing room. The ice field, its nursery. The Rocky Bowl, a temporary resting place.
Oh my God. Oh!
Down from the mountains comes the meltings of the snowfields. Down through a trail of green meadows and brown hills. following paths cut long ago. One year like the next, but still ever changing, ever different. Ever growing on its way. Eventually, this river will head west, but as David Thompson discovered in 1807, early on it heads north. Thompson worked for the Northwest Company of Merchants of Canada, shortened to the Northwest Company. Fur was their business. Thompson, as far as we know, was the first to follow the Columbia from its source to its meeting with the ocean. The Columbia River was a wild river, one rapids after another. In 1885, a fellow named A.P. Coleman went through Surprise Rapids on a small raft. Afterwards, all he said was he did not care to repeat the exploit. The river has changed. A person can sing the song of the rapids which are no more. Surprise Rapids, Kinnebasket, 12-Mile Rapids, Rock Slide, Death Rapids. They are no more. A series of lakes cover what once was fast-flowing water. This is why. Mica Dam, whose waters back around the Big Bend, the northernmost point of the Columbia. Here was the boat encampment, for decades a place to rendezvous for the fur brigades. The Columbia River, all along its path, has been a place to rendezvous. We see that on our journey along the Columbia by air. The Columbia flows under the Trans-Canada Highway at Revelstoke, British Columbia. Keeps on heading south. The Columbia River has another name here, Arrow Lakes. An inland sea floating among the mountains. Arrow Lakes, before the railroads, before the highways, the lakes were a means of transportation. Even now they still are. At Shelter Bay, no bridge, a government tax dollar paid ferry. Southbound on the hour, northbound on the half hour. Above the lakes, the mountains continue. One valley opens to the next.
You almost can't fathom the scope of these mountains. They're so big, but there's so many of them that they just don't look as big as they are.
If tourists get caught up in the scenery, they should not be embarrassed.
Oh, look at that. Wow. That's just wonderful. What a beautiful canyon.
The lakes weren't named because of their shape. A missionary explorer, Father de Smet, passed this way and wrote that he saw innumerable arrows were sticking out from openings in a rock on the shore. Father de Smet concluded it might have been Indian custom, perhaps with a religious meaning, since the arrows were valuable items and not collected for reuse. Rivers and industry have lived together for centuries. This was the river of logs and loggers, a way to get from the hills to the mills. It still is. At Castlegar, the Kootenay River joins the Columbia. Miles away near the Columbia's headwaters, the two rivers nearly merged. Such is the whim of landscape. There is Trail, British Columbia, a mining town with homes on the hills and a plant by the river. A good neighbor, say the townsfolk. On to the south, the border between Canada and the United States. Easily determined on the connecting highways. The river just keeps moving. Its destination roughly 700 miles away. The river still 1,290 feet above sea level. At Kettle Falls, Washington, there is no falls. Once a gathering spot for Native Americans, when this was a place of salmon. Up on the hill, you get a sense of the past. In 1847, Catholic priests built a church alongside a road coming up from a river landing. More than 150 years later, it still is here. Apparently, it is easier to keep a wood building on land than a waterfalls in a river. Now the Columbia is called Roosevelt Lake. The lake covered Kettle Falls and more. The lake stretches on and on and on. 151 miles. A lake created by a very large dam. For a generation of people, the name Grand Coulee Dam always would mean gigantic accomplishment. Miles away from the Columbia River, some of its history. Rivers don't always stay in their same paths, not even the Columbia. Years ago, there was a change here. And it also left dry the world's greatest waterfall. Warren, why don't you just show it to them over here? Look at this. This was all one big waterfall. It happened 12,000 years ago. An ice dam in present-day Montana gave way. Water roared across the land. The ice dams in Montana grew, then broke 40 times in the next 2,000 years. This is the result. A torrent which dug a new riverbed 400 feet deep. A waterfall which stretched for 3.5 miles. Upstream, you can see the scratches in the earth where rocks were shoved along the water's path. The river doesn't flow this way anymore. Well, in a sense it does. At Grand Coulee Dam, giant pumps bring Columbia River water to Banks Lake. Part of the Grand Coulee, which is a section of the old river bend. From this lake, irrigation water flows throughout the Columbia Basin Project to farms throughout the region. When the present-day river leaves Grand Coulee Dam, it makes the second of its two big bends. The rocks of canyon walls are the rocks of farmers' fields. How much effort went into fields dimpled with piles of rocks? It's part of the legacy of those who broke the ground along the Columbia River years ago. Now among the crops, orchards grow. And in the river, an island, Lone Pine Island. Sometimes not much of it shows. The town of Pateros, above the town a bit of riverside art, 20th century variety, looks kind of plain in the daytime. At night, it does not look plain at all. Along this section of the Columbia at the end of the 19th century, a huge section of cliff dropped into the river. For almost 24 hours, the river was stopped. Downstream, the riverbed was dry. A day later, the river got around the dam and everything returned to normal. As big a town as we've yet seen along the river, Wenatchee, the center of fruit production in the Columbia River Valley. They lay claim to that title. South of Wenatchee, the large factory produces aluminum, built for the Korean War when there was a demand for aircraft. The plant is here because of another dam, Rock Island. The first dam built on the Columbia River, the year 1931. A Northwest utility company built it, overshadowed by the publicity of later federal dams. Desert country here, no cities creeping in, just a river heading toward an ocean. Interrupted by Wanapum Dam, named for an Indian tribe of the area. They were fishermen who never went to war against the United States, so they never had a treaty. They never had a reservation. We are coming to Priest Rapids Dam now. If one dam seems like the next, we remember this dam because it is above the last free-flowing stretch of the Columbia River above tidewater in the United States. This free-flowing section of river is the Hanford Reach. Just like other topics, it can be emotional. Over the years, people have argued there should be one more dam to produce power. Others say there should not. The White Bluffs on one side. On the other, the Hanford Atomic Reserve. In the 40s, this part of the world came to life. It had cold, clean water running past. There was electricity from the Grand Coulee Dam. In a matter of months, the town of Hanford disappeared. Farmers were sent elsewhere. 51,000 men and women came to the area to work around the clock. Many didn't know what the project was, didn't know it was making material for a new type of bomb. That was at the B reactor. Half a century later, the B reactor is dark and deserted. A lot of controversy along this section of the river, from radiation releases which drifted over populated areas decades ago, to its current use as a nuclear disposal site and an area to be cleaned. Towns along a river. In a group, they lose their identity. Richland, Kennewick, Pasco become the Tri-Cities. Travelers don't remember which city they were in, but they remember a bridge. A reminder we can build things which are beautiful. Downstream, the Snake River joins the Columbia. The drainage from mountains in Wyoming and Montana and Idaho. Another junction with history. Lewis and Clark came this way. It was October 16th, 1805. Lewis and Clark found themselves facing rapids of a kind they never had encountered. 5 Mile Rapids, Umatilla Rapids, now buried beneath the waters stored by McNary Dam. Along the banks, corporate farms pump irrigation water. When pivoted sprinklers came into existence, they brought a new sight for airline passengers miles overhead. This far along our trip down the Columbia, one dam begins to look like the next. McNary is named for a U.S. Senator from Oregon. It has a feature visitors compared to a water slide, built to transfer young fish from river to barge for hauling below the dams. Safe passage to the sea. It is another one of the Columbia River heated discussion topics. On the river flows, the land changing as it goes. A vineyard there, a community here. A man's dream over there. On a hill west of US 97, a man named Hill spent years building what now is a museum. When first started, no one knew what it would be. Sam Hill was vague himself. Named it Mary Hill for his wife, who never came here. Dedicated by a queen from Romania. The building sat empty for a while, now is filled with art treasures. Near here, Lewis and Clark recorded sighting a large mountain. Early of a morning, you get a hint of what they might have seen. Mount Hood. From another of Sam Hill's projects. Sunrise at Hill's Stonehenge replica. Ahead of us, a major change in the landscape. So many changes with the river. changes to the land beside it, changes in the life along the river. Here, a look at tradition. Another generation doing as their ancestors did. From platforms above the river, they wait for the fish to come. They wait longer than their ancestors. But the fish are here, just not as many. From nets in boats, during the limited days they are given, they harvest what their families always have harvested. But not as many. Another river topic of discussion. Upstream from the Dalles Dam, one of their last great fishing places, Celilo Falls, covered when the dam was built. But below the dam, from platforms along the walls, a shadow of the old ways. Another generation watches, learns. The river cycle continues, as it does in tributaries where the salmon go to spawn. From the Dalles to Portland, when people say the gorge, this is what they mean, where the great river cuts its way through the Cascade Mountains. It is a place of flowers. Where once upon a time a lumber company had a mill on a hill and sent its rough-cut lumber to the bottom in a flume. A memory of a different time. Sam Hill, who built Maryhill, also gave us a road which became a work of art. The major east-west highway until a freeway came along. We abandoned the old road in places, destroyed parts of it, until 40 years later we wished we hadn't. So we worked to reopen what was closed. There is Cascade Lock, where a small railroad portaged goods around a falls. And Bridge of the Gods. Charles Lindbergh supposedly flew under it. A bridge toll taker said he saw it happen. This is a river of tugs and barges. A river of stern wheelers and sightseers. Bonneville Dam, first of the public power dams to go online, dedicated by President Franklin Roosevelt. Here, waterfalls from the mountain tops. It is a section of river with federal designations, which is a topic of heated discussion too. Beacon Rock, a landmark for passers-by. Out there in the distance, the cities of Portland and Vancouver. And for a few miles, this becomes a river of many people. Along the river, work goes on around the clock. Here, the Willamette joins the Columbia. The last of the large tributaries to merge. From here to the sea, the river weaves its way past islands. The largest, Sauvie Island, a farmer's paradise. For eons, a beneficiary of the river's annual flooding. A part of the island is a wildlife refuge. The lower river moves with the rhythm of the ocean tides. A lighthouse marks the west end of Sauvie Island. A cooling tower is a landmark downstream. another riverside topic which raises the temperature in a room. River widens. Generations of fishermen called it home. Along the banks you find their communities. Along the river, the projects which appear to not have gone as planned. The dry dock, a Canadian hydrofoil prototype, sold, bought, waiting. The tempo of life along a river flows with the river. It did when the United States government operated a quarantine station on the Washington shore. Ships on which there was illness came to the Napton dock. The piling still marched to the shore. The highway crosses the path the immigrants took to the wooden building. The river broadens even more. Flows past historic Astoria. First commercial American settlement on the Pacific coast, 1811. One final bridge. One final outcropping of land. The Columbia reaches the sea. Two lighthouses on the Washington side signal farewell. The 1,200-mile journey is over. But in the mountains of two countries, there is snow and ice waiting to melt and start its journey to the sea.